It was 10 years ago today that we cut the ribbon here for the CSS Neuse historic site. Hey, this is one of my favorite places. When you go in there and see, it's so great because you can walk in here, see the Neuse 1, the original Neuse, and then you can walk across the street and see the Neuse 2. And for me, having worked on the ferry division, I used to work on the Neuse, so I always called her the Neuse 3. You know, my historical background here, everything going on here. But good. So here we are, 160 years later, we're going to pick up on the Battle of Wise's Ford. First of four major battles like I talked about last night. I want to start with, let's go ahead and get this question out of the way. Because you're going to hear me 90% of the time say this. Well, that's more of the contemporary name for it. Now, why is that? Well, in 1865, according to the U.S. Army, this is how the battle was spelled and pronounced. Okay. And there was two forks in the road at the time. Now there's no fork in the road. But there was two forks in the road, and those of you who've done a lot of genealogy, you can understand how surnames kind of dwarf in the different areas and stuff like that. But understand that historically, the U.S. Army is called the Battle of Wise's Ford. All right? In contemporary terms, we call it Wise's Ford. Now, if you're a Southern soldier fighting here, you don't refer to that in 1865. It's the Battle of Kinston, the Battle of Southwest Creek, the Battle of Jackson's Mill. And if you're from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, from the Army of Tennessee, Sergeant Truesdale that got off the train here from Tupelo, Mississippi, you like to put a G in there and you call it Kingston, because there's several locations out there in the deep south that still have Kingston. All right, next slide. Oh, that's me, that's right.
It's in your hand, buddy.
And guess what? This is technology. Watch this. Next slide.
Oh, you got it. You hit the right. There you go.
All right. As I mentioned last night, 2 weeks of fury. First of four battles. Wise's Fort, over here modern day Fort Bragg, Monroe's Crossroads, that's the pure cavalry battle. And then Aversboro and Bentonville, four battles are fought here in North Carolina in March of 1865. All four of these battles are initiated by the Confederates. Three of them are purely offensive in nature, which means they're going after them. The only one that assumed a defense from the start was over at the Battle of Aversboro with General Hardee. So a lot of fighting here, and this, when you read some of the accounts from Sherman's veterans, one even said the rebels haven't shown this much pluck since Atlanta. And that would be the spring and summer of 64. Why all this fighting? This guy right here. William Tecumseh Sherman, December of 1864, he presents the city of Savannah, Georgia to President Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas gift. And the big question from the Union forces from strategic perspective, from Sherman's boss, Ulysses S. Grant, what to do with his army of 60,000 that now sits in Savannah. Sherman's boss, Grant, wanted his army put on boats and sent north up to Virginia. Because in the fall and the winter of 64, there's a knockdown, drag-out trench warfare around Petersburg and Richmond between Robert E. Lee and the Union forces up there. And if you infuse 60,000 more federal soldiers on Virginia soil, it's very quickly going to turn Robert E. Lee out of his trenches, out in the open, boom, lights out, game's over. By this stage of the game, they know you take out Robert E. Lee, who's the center of gravity, you take out Robert E. Lee and the game is over. It plays right into Sherman's thought process because there's essentially not enough boats to move that many men north in a timely manner. Sherman says, hey boss, let me march north. I just went from Atlanta to Savannah. I will go from Savannah to Petersburg area, and I will link up with you. In the meanwhile, when I'm going north, I'll destroy anything and everything of value to the Confederate war effort. Arsenals like Fayetteville, railroads, warehouses, mills, you name it. And oh, by the way, demonstrate to the Southern population that this game is over. Grant approves that, and Sherman will begin his march north on 1 February 1865. Before he leaves Savannah, he puts his finger on the map and tells his senior logistician, General Langdon Easton, who's quartermaster, and his Amos Beckwith and W.W. Wright, who you'll see out on the battlefield today, He tells those three gentlemen, you're not on the march with me, go over to Hilton Head, get on a boat, get up to Morehead City, and get this railroad going from the port of Morehead all the way to Goldsboro. I want to meet you in Goldsboro mid-March, and I want you to resupply my army before it continues north. It's about 450 miles as the crow flies from Savannah to Goldsboro. Now the problem with needing a railroad at this time, here's the Wilmington and Weldon. Want to know why I have it shaded in red? The Confederates still control it. From Morehead City over to New Bern and about 9-10 miles west out to Bachelor's Creek, the Federals control the railroad. They captured that in 1862 when General Burnside came through here. But between New Bern and Kinston, where you see yellow there, there's about 17 miles of track that was pulled up beginning in the spring of '62. So there's no railroad there. So if Sherman's looking to be resupplied by rail, we got a problem here. One, Fort Fisher still exists, Wilmington, and then this one little yellow here. So you can see strategically why the Federals are going to have to start putting more focus here on the eastern part of the state. Now, when General Grant approved Sherman down here in Savannah marching north, he executed a couple big strategic moves. First, if you want to use the Port of Wilmington and the railroad, you've got to take out Fort Fisher first. So now all of a sudden Fort Fisher is a focus. And by January 16th, Terry and Porter have captured Fort Fisher, but they still don't have Wilmington yet. Also out here in western Middle Tennessee, John M. Schofield and the 23rd Corps, along with General Marr, will begin a long move, steamboat along the Ohio River, link up with the B&O Railroad, all the way over to Annapolis and Alexandria, where they will get on boats and come down and resupply efforts here, for sure, to reinforce efforts down here on coastal North Carolina. So a lot of moving pieces. Now before Sherman leaves Savannah, this is his march route where you see the dark blue stars. First Columbia, Fayetteville, and there's Goldsboro. Now the thing about Sherman is his army's 60,000 and he moves in two wings. You hear folks say the left wing or the right wing. Each of them have an objective, Charleston or Augusta, when we start. Now they're not heading there, but they want to give the impression the right wing is going against Charleston. The left wing is going for Augusta. And what that does is any Confederate forces in this area, if they're going to try to guard all 3 points, guess what? When you're outnumbered, that's not going to work. So this plays right into Sherman's hands because he marches straight up here to Columbia by February 17th. He's got Columbia by March 11th, Fayetteville, and then by March 21st, he's ultimately going to have Goldsboro. But you can see, even as we go, Charlotte or Wilmington. And then once he even gets to Fayetteville, it's more of, where's he going now? Goldsboro, Raleigh, Greensboro? Now the Confederates do a little bit of reaction based upon this themselves. The Confederate Army of Tennessee over here in Tupelo, that's Sergeant Truesdale I talked about last night. President Jefferson Davis orders the Army of Tennessee to begin a long move through the Deep South and up into the Carolinas, where it's going to reinforce the forces here going against him. The other thing that Jefferson Davis is going to do, he orders Wade Hampton, who's a cavalry commander up in Lee's Army in Northern Virginia, Lieutenant General Wade Hampton is ordered to move down into South Carolina, because he's a South Carolinian, to try to rally the forces here against Sherman coming up. Now you can see these now. February 17th, Columbia has fallen. Fort Fisher has fallen by now. Wilmington falls on February 22nd. So you can see Confederate President Jefferson Davis is not having a very good month of February. You just lost the capital of South Carolina, and you also just lost Wilmington, which is bad news because of the blockade running with Fort Fisher and Wilmington out of it. Now, this is when Joseph Eggleston Johnston, who was in semi-retirement out here in the western part of the state near Charlotte, is brought back on board to try to turn back or defeat Sherman. And this was Johnston's orders from Lee. Now initially he's supposed to take over command all the forces from the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. That's General Hardee. And the other one was the Army of Tennessee, which is coming in from Tupelo, Mississippi. And his orders are to concentrate and drive back Sherman. Now understand Sherman's got 60,000 with him in South Carolina. But all those movements bringing Schofield over from Tennessee to the coastal region of North Carolina, now you've got another 30,000 Union soldiers on the coast. And Johnston knows if those two unite, that's almost 90,000 Union soldiers in the state of North Carolina. It will be that many by the first week of March. The most Johnston can put on the battlefield at one time will be at Bentonville, and that's only 20,000 men. So you can see where he's got multiple threats, and Lee wants him to concentrate and drive back Sherman. Oh yeah, well, I'll do the best I can, guy. But what Johnston's not a fool, he somewhat questions this, because why am I being brought back in? If you didn't know the relationship, President Davis and Joe Johnston are not sending each other Christmas cards every year. They don't like one another at all. So Johnston suspects there's something up by me being brought in, because he understands. It's the fourth quarter of a football game. It's the 2-minute warning, and we're losing by like 28 points. All right, we're not going to win this game. But Johnston knows if he might be able to get some good bargaining chips at some kind of negotiation when it comes to surrender, if he can maintain an army in the field. But initially, this is important for Wise's Fort. When Lee first put Johnston in charge, it did not include the Department of North Carolina with General Bragg. Now why is that? Well, those two aren't sending each other Christmas cards either. But Johnston knows if I don't have control, I'm fighting in North Carolina, but I don't control the forces that belong to North Carolina, something's wrong there, right? That's the principle of war, unity of command. There could be only one guy in charge, and Bragg doesn't want to say, hey, Johnston, hey, General Bragg, can I borrow General Hoke's division? See, General Hoke's division is about 4,500 men. And I just said the most he could ever put on the battlefield is 20,000. So 25% of his infantry, his combat power, he doesn't even control. So Johnston goes back to Lee. Lee cuts a frago to the original order and puts Bragg up under Johnston, who immediately, Bragg writes President Davis, please, please, please remove me from this embarrassing situation. But he doesn't. So by the time Wise's Fort rolls around, Bragg is working for Johnston. Now here's Johnston's dilemma. By the time he takes command, almost by the end of February, Sherman is almost to North Carolina border. So, and we know Wilmington has fallen. And we know he's not going, so where is he going to go next? So the box has kind of gotten smaller figuring out where Sherman's going. And it's either going to be the capital, Raleigh, or it's going to be Goldsboro. And so what Johnston does is he kind of puts his finger on the map and says all these Confederate forces that are flowing in from every direction, I want to concentrate them at Smithfield. Because Smithfield sits halfway on the railroad between Raleigh and Goldsboro. And once they determine where Sherman's direction is, they can quickly jump on a train and move either east or west to deal with Sherman. On March 9th, Johnston will go to Fayetteville. This is General Hardee, who's been coming up from Charleston. It's a foot race. Who's going to get to Fayetteville first? Well, this is the day after the first day of Wise's Fort. Now, we're going to talk about this morning because Bragg and Hill and Hoke are going to capture or kill more than 1,000 Union soldiers early this morning by 11 o'clock. So this is a major victory in the East. Think about it now. 60,000 Federals coming up from South Carolina, another 13 over in New Bern, and almost 17 down in Wilmington. Johnston knows if I can beat back them and make them go back to New Bern or Wilmington, Then we can turn around and let's focus on Sherman, where it's 20 against 60 versus 20 against 90. So he makes the decision on the evening of March 8th, since Bragg did very well here, what Army of Tennessee soldiers that are at Smithfield, get them on a train east and send them here. Let's get that decisive victory. I mean, you slapped them around on March 8th. Let's go for the jugular on March 9th. Make sense? But in doing that, he essentially gave up Fayetteville. He said, basically, Johnston told Hardee, go ahead and get your infantry across the river, Cape Fear, head towards Smithfield, let Wade Hampton do his rear guard cavalry stuff, and by March 11th, Sherman has occupied Fayetteville. Now there's another force that's coming up that's going to be important. And a lot of times it's not on any maps that some contemporary historians use. The 23rd Corps, when it came from Tennessee, only one of those divisions went to New Bern. The other two were down in Wilmington. Well, they're going to start to move north, essentially up what we would think today as Highway 17 between Jacksonville and Wilmington, but they're more on the training area of Camp Lejeune. But essentially, they're coming up that way. So Bragg is going to know the whole time when he's fighting this battle here at Wise's Ford that there's two more divisions, about another 10,000 Federals, that are en route to Kinston. So that's going to play into his game plan here. That brings us to Wise's Ford. General Cox, who's in command here, about 13,000 Federals, folks. Mostly pulled from Roanoke Island, Beaufort, Fort Macon, Morehead City, wherever, New Bern, wherever he can pull forces from, he cobbles them together very quickly. And then over here, you see Ruger's division from the 23rd Corps. Now, there's one thing that's going to, if Cox has an Achilles tendon, it's going to be his cavalry. He only has one regiment of cavalry, which he's going to find very quickly that they're somewhat questionable or reliability. General Bragg will mostly bring, by March 10th, he'll have about 9,000 Confederates here. And you can see here it's almost like a joke, Golden Corral buffet bar. Here's General Hoke, who's on loan, his division from the Army of Northern Virginia. Remember, about 4,500 men. So you can see right here, it's almost half of his entire force is right here with Robert Hoke. Then we have our young 16 and 17-year-old boys, the junior reserves. A few department forces here, a couple regiments, 67, 68. And then here you see the Army of Tennessee that's flowing in initially. These are the boys that's going to get here first from Smithfield. They got here first from Tupelo, Smithfield. They come down here, and then the evening of March 9th, Walthall's boys from A.P. Stewart's Corps are going to start to flow in on the night of March 9th and the early morning of March 10th. That's like when I said Truesdale jumped off the train on the morning of March 10th. Well, that's his bunch right here. Now, I kind of hint on this thing here that they don't get along, but D.H. Hill over here, these two don't get along neither. There's a whole bunch of people not sending each other Christmas cards. You know, not very friendly. But you know what? You got a whole lot of stars here. When I mean stars, I mean rank. Whole lot of generals and not very many privates. And the problem is, a lot of these generals don't get along. These two, especially because of the Battle of Chickamauga, he's still a major general. He was up for 3-star general until that fiasco. Now, D.H. Hill can somewhat caustic at times. He'll definitely tell you how he feels, and unfortunately, he speaks sometimes too soon. Should have put his foot in the mouth real quick. But anyways, it gets him in trouble. But Johnston tells D.H. Hill, before he leaves Smithfield on that train, I beg you to forget the past for this emergency. And he's telling Hill, please, just go over there and just do what he tells you to do. Don't argue. All right? General Cox, early morning of March 2nd, they're coming out of New Bern, either along the railroad or coming down the Neuse Road. Their focus is here along Southwest Creek where we were last night. You know, There's 3 major bridges. We're gonna look at those today. Essentially Highway 70, and then where the railroad is, and then up around Southwest Creek. We'll go to those 3 bridge crossings this morning. But here's General Couch coming up with those other 2 divisions. It's essentially coming up from Wilmington through Camp Lejeune, Jacksonville area, on the way up here to link up. Now, Bragg has some pretty good eyes on it. The 2nd South Carolina Cavalry and the 6th North Carolina Cavalry. They're down operating in this area here, and they keep good eyes on Couch's movement and very good reporting Bragg. So Bragg knows where about they're at, how far they're out from Kinston. But it's a fairly easy move coming up here. And the problem for General Cox, he's led to believe over here in Kinston, there's nothing but old men and young boys. He has no clue that Johnston has decided to reinforce Bragg here at Kinston. Robert Hope's 4,500 and another almost 3,000 Army of Tennessee that's going to be flowing in. And Cox's focus is not so much on the enemy. When he was ordered to move north from Wilmington into New Bern, his orders were essentially focused on the railroad. Fix that railroad and get supplies to Goldsboro. See, when Wilmington fell on February 22nd, I didn't mention this little story for you. The railroad and the port of Wilmington was a disaster. General Hope made sure you weren't going to use that railroad for a while. He burnt the bridge over Northeast Cape Fear, turntable destroyed, anything railroad infrastructure, all a disaster. So everything focused up to Morehead City. Well, right after the fall of Fort Fisher back in January, General Grant paid a trip to North Carolina. He literally went all the way down to Wilmington, introduced General Schofield to Terry and Admiral Porter, and said, your mission is get Wilmington, so we can use that for Sherman. And when he got back off the boat, steamed back up the coast, and came into the port at Morehead City, the commander there, General Ennis Palmer, whose headquarters was in New Bern, had no idea that the boss's boss's boss just showed up. Ulysses S. Grant is the man. He's the big man. He reports only to Lincoln. So when Grant showed up, Palmer comes screaming down the railroad to Morehead City from New Bern. And they have a little walk around over in Beaufort on Front Street. I guess they went to Clawson's or something, who knows. But Grant tells Palmer, get your forces moving out of New Bern and fix that 17 miles of railroad. That was January 27th when they had that meeting. Fast forward to Wilmington, February 22nd. It's a disaster there. But that's okay. Grant told Palmer, we'll just shift everything up to Morehead City, right? Palmer's not left New Bern. Almost a month later. He's not followed Grant's orders at all. So Schofield sends Jacob D. Cox, who's one of his better generals. He summons Palmer down to Wilmington for a little face-to-face, but Grant has already given Schofield permission to fire General Palmer. Palmer shows up with his wife, and all his staff officers show up with their wives. I don't know where they thought they were going, to a picnic on Fort Fisher Beach. I don't know. But Palmer got the rude announcement. Essentially, General Cox, jump on Palmer's boat, go back up there to New Bern and Morehead City, get this thing going. General Cox arrives in New Bern on the night of February 28th. In less than 36 hours, they're marching down that railroad, headed to where we're going to go today. So what Palmer couldn't do in almost a month, Cox made happen in 36 hours. You see, Schofield is nervous as a cat on February 22nd because he's reading Confederate newspapers. Columbia burned on February 17th. So where is Sherman, 5 days later? He's got to be close to the North Carolina line. And I don't have supplies waiting for him. Remember Sherman's orders? Meet me in Goldsboro mid-March. He's got roughly 2 weeks. 2 weeks to make this thing happen. Cox will come down. We're gonna visit Southwest Creek. The action kind of starts on March 7th, as I spoke last night. We're gonna hit these sites, but these bridges across Southwest Creek, they're gonna try to take, because remember, it's nothing but old men and young boys there, right? Now, Hoke is there, as you see. So it's not gonna be an easy task. And even down along here on the railroad, the other one was Highway 70, they're gonna try. And that's gonna set us up for where we're gonna jump on the bus right now and head on out to the battlefield. And we're gonna walk these sites here. I'm gonna get your minds turned, and then we're gonna pick up the fight on March 8th, okay? With that said, folks, we can